where I drop things on the pod or in the notes, and nobody's going to care about this. And all of a sudden, it's a gigantic fiasco with 4 million impressions. And I said, wow, like I didn't think that was going to be a thing at all. So you have to be prepared for anything. I have to say the McKenna stuff and the reaction to it, it's a big deal. And maybe I kind of knew that already, but the amount of feedback I got on it was massive. Like, this is big news where he's going to play next year. And again, because I'm not watching the juniors or the NCAA as much as I'm watching the NHL, maybe I didn't take it seriously enough. I don't know. But where this kid's going to play next season, there's a lot of interest in that, a ton of interest in that. And, and as I said on the pod, I asked a bunch of people, and the name they came up to was Penn State. But I think, and we'll see if that turns out to be true or that turns out to be incorrect. But Kyle, the thing that really stood out to me was how many of people wanted to talk to me more about, what didn't you report? How much more do you know?
But yeah, that was what's really going on.
What's really going on. And to be honest, they're like, people, and Kyle and Dom know this, I'm not that deep. Like, I'm very superficial. So there's not much more to me, really. So, but it was really fascinating. It was, sometimes when you're not in that sphere, because there are some people, and for example, Sam Cosentino and Jason Bucalo from our place, who are really in that sphere, along with some, there's Scott Wheeler, there's Corey Pronman, there's Cam Robinson, there's a whole bunch of people out there who really do prospects. I obviously don't. So they probably would say you should have known what the reaction would be, but I was surprised, and I was impressed at how many people cared about that.
Yeah, it does make a lot of sense. Average over 2 points per game in the regular season, over 2 points in the playoffs, 6 points in 4 games at the Memorial Cup. I mean, nearly helped lug the Tigers to the Memorial Cup championship before falling to London in the final. For a guy that, again, is still 1 year away from being eligible to be taken. Like, you think about all the brilliant things that Connor McDavid accomplished in the Ontario Hockey League, that part of his life and career, and what Gavin McKenna is doing is, Sidney Crosby too, for that matter, but what Gavin McKenna is doing is just something really, really impressive there. Dallas, Elliot, the coaching search, as we talked about, another name we should consider.
Yes, Kyle, so Texas lost to Abbotsford in the Western Conference Final of the AHL playoffs. So it's Abbotsford against Charlotte for the Calder Cup. And Dallas is going to have a big decision to make. We talked a little bit about Neil Graham last pod, their coach with the Texas Stars. Dallas is going to have a decision to make here about, whether or not he's ready now, or what do they do with him now? Keep him behind the bench in Texas, promote him to the big team. What do they do? Like, I think there's a realization there that they may lose him if he's not the guy. But another name that was mentioned to me is another current member of their staff in the NHL, and that is Alain Nasreddine. They said that he will be interviewed if he hasn't been interviewed already. I don't know the answer to this, but it was suspected by a couple people that Nasreddine may have interviewed elsewhere this year. But the feeling there is, and may have interviewed elsewhere this year. I do think potentially some other teams in the aftermath of DeBoer being fired reached out to Dallas to ask what Nasreddine's situation is. And I think for now, they're telling people he's part of our search. So, and it also fits, Nasreddine, who's been around a long time, was interim in New Jersey during a coaching change before Lindy Ruff was hired. So he has a tiny bit of experience as a head coach, although those are always very difficult situations. But, we'd mentioned that do not be surprised if Dallas goes different or fresh. And I had a couple of people say to me, you should add Nasreddin to your list, that it's not impossible he ends up the next head coach of the Stars.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense, especially with Jim Nill saying they're looking externally and internally as they now begin a search, as you say, that a few weeks back they didn't anticipate they would be embarking on. All right, so Elliot, last pod we talked about the Vegas Golden Knights, Alex Pietrangelo, what his future could look like health-wise, and when if we may see him in uniform for the Golden Knights next year. And now rumors out there with William Karlsson potentially being out there on the trade block. What are you hearing in that regard?
Yeah, so again, I always want to stress this. As many of you who follow hockey, especially on social media, there's a lot of crazy stuff flying around at this time of year. And sometimes even for us who deal in it, it's hard to separate fact from fiction. And so I'm not interested in fighting anyone that's got William Karlsson's name out there. To be honest, I don't know really where it came from. All I'm going to say is that I got pushback from teams about Karlsson. Now, I haven't spoken to Vegas directly, and it's always possible, and I stress this, always possible that Vegas may be talking to one or two specific teams about him that I haven't found. But I will say, I asked a few people about Karlsson, and either they told me they're not under the impression he's available, or I suspect in at least one or two cases they asked and were told no. They didn't come right out and say it, but the kind of way they talked about it made me feel it that way. So again, I don't think it's impossible. There might only be 10 or 15 guys in this league that are completely untouchable, but I asked around about Karlsson, and just the people I speak to, they told me they had either no indication Vegas was willing to do it, or had been specifically told Vegas wasn't doing it. So if Karlsson's available, and I stress if, it's a situation out there that I haven't found yet. I know they really like the player, because there was a time a while ago I heard something and I checked in on it, and I was told that they really liked the player. So again, I'm not saying it's impossible, but you'd have to show me what the situation would be.
Yeah, well, 2 years left on his deal, and AAV under 6, so you could see why other teams would be calling and saying, hey, what are you thinking there? Is there any chance?
And he's still a heck of a player. He is still a really good player.
All right. Speaking of a heck of a player, TJ Oshie certainly was one for a long time. Whether it was in a St. Louis Blues uniform, Washington Capitals uniform, 1,010 regular season games in all over the course of his career. He announced his retirement on Monday. Stanley Cup champion in 2018. The brilliant shootout performance at the 2014 Olympics in Sochi. For myself, a player I would have covered a little more towards the back half of his career, mainly as a Washington Capital, Elliot, but always a joy to deal with because you got an honest answer out of him and was just a pleasant interaction. Your thoughts on the career of TJ Oshie?
Well, it's just a great player to deal with. I interviewed him actually right after that shootout in Sochi, and he was a great interview. I asked him to explain the move, and he broke it down for me. Really easy guy to deal with, friendly from a media point of view, and obviously turned into a heck of a player and a key piece of a Stanley Cup champion. You remember, Oshie had a couple of he reminds me a lot of people, early in his career, as a young guy. There were some discipline issues he had to deal